Previously on Coffee with Kenobi. This is James Arnold Taylor, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi. I have a good feeling about this.
Live from the Coffee with Kenobi studios in Central Illinois, we are on the air with Dennis Keith and Chris Perillo. Tom has a previous commitment, so it'll be me doing the news. And later on the show, we're going to talk about George Lucas turning 73. We bring in our guest co-hosts, Starship, Sabres, and Scoundrels co-host Dennis Keithley, and YouTube, tech, and Star Wars rock star Chris Perillo. We're going to start the show with a number of things to talk about at the top. Last week, interestingly enough, was the 4-year anniversary of our show. It kind of slipped my mind last week, but it's definitely been a very exciting experience. I'm getting to meet lots of new people all the time. Dennis and I hung out quite a bit at Celebration, and Chris wasn't able to make it to Celebration, but I'm hoping I will get the chance to shake your hand very soon, sir.
Eventually. It'll happen.
Eventually, absolutely. I want to follow up, too, with last week we had a brief topic about the interesting things that happened on Dagobah with Yoda and Luke, of course, which is not new. But we looked at the idea of Luke moving rocks and compared that to a Buddhist practice. And I got a lot of interesting feedback about that. I got everything from Jesus moves rock to come out of the tomb, and that opens up obviously new possibilities. And we've got the Buddhist practice that they move rocks for serenity and finding inner peace. And it's just been interesting, the kind of things that people are saying to me after we talked about this last week. What do you two think about that scene with Yoda and Luke and the symbolism of moving rocks? Because it happens again in Rebels, it happens in Clone Wars, it happens a lot through Star Wars.
Well, the symbolism is interesting. I mean, I always appreciated that scene simply because it demonstrated Luke had these doubts about the abilities to do things like lift an X-Wing after, he'd had trouble just focusing, levitating rocks. And then immediately Yoda puts the smackdown on with those concerns by taking the X-Wing out of the swamp. So, for me, it was always a stepping stone type of event. But it's interesting that something I appreciated last week when you all were talking about, the symbolism that, the force is created by life and it flows through all things. Yet here are these rocks, and they've been there, probably shaped by the elements well before Luke and Yoda and anyone else was around in that swamp, and they'll be there long after. So they're just kind of a permanent fixture there, and the force flows around them.
Yeah, I guess I'm reminded of how when we walk into a store that has those doors that automatically open when you step on the plate or stand in front of a sensor, and we always tell our daughter, "Hey, use the force," and then she kind of holds up her hand and then they open, which is not spiritual at all, but it is kind of fun. I think to me, it's fascinating, and I think possibly why Star Wars is far more than just a movie, so to speak, more than just a fantasy world. I mean, it's these touch points that we might have with our own culture that I think helps it resonate continuously.
I agree. There's just so much that people are able to glom onto, and I think a beautiful thing about an authentic mythology, and obviously Star Wars is, of course, the American mythology for our times, is there's a little bit there for everybody, and it's almost like, here's this pie of Star Wars, and you can have a couple of slices and be very satisfied, or you can eat the whole thing and get a lot of Star Wars cavities, and this is a good thing, because it's a nice, welcome escape. And I think, as I've said before, the nice thing about, as Mark Twain said, the great thing about fiction is that it is obliged to tell the truth. Whereas sometimes you can't always count on that. But with fiction, there's always that wonderful commentary on what makes us tick and what is valued by our culture. And I think just something as simple as moving rocks and finding serenity in peace through nature and calm, I think that's a nice metaphor for all of us.
Well, that's very well put. I hadn't thought of Mark Twain's comment there, and yeah, I mean, who can't relate to that? And who hasn't picked up pebbles and skipped them into a stream, or thrown them into the ocean, or just collected rocks?
Another thing I want to touch on, this is really kind of interesting. I'd say a few months ago, a textbook company out of France reached out to me and they asked me if I had any opinions on the Kylo Ren scene where he was looking at his grandfather's. I don't know if I want to say it's a skull. I don't know that we know that there's a skull inside there still, but we know that it's the helmet of Vader, the charred, kind of smashed helmet of Vader. And they asked me what I thought about that compared to Hamlet holding up the skull that says, "Alas, poor Yorick, I knew him, Horatio." And so I sent them like a paragraph, and they said, "Hey, we like this. Would you be willing to work on a textbook?" Now, this is a textbook for people from France who are learning English as a second language, but they're studying Shakespeare. Now, to me, I know how hard Shakespeare is for people who have English as their native language, so learning Shakespeare as a second language, that's pretty impressive. So I recorded some stuff for them, and if I have permission, I'll probably play it later on in the show. But I got it in the mail this week. So I'm opening it, and there's a workbook, and there's a regular textbook. And, I'm an educator and a Star Wars fan, so this is pretty neat. I open up one of the pages, and on the left side, it's got George Lucas, and it says, "George Lucas is an American filmmaker. He has created Star Wars and directed episodes 1, 2, 3, and 4. Then I look to the next page, and it's got my picture, and it says, "Dan Zare is an American teacher of English and is the co-host of Coffee with Kenobi, a podcast about Star Wars." And I don't know, I was just so proud to show my family, "Hey, look, here's this textbook. I wrote a little piece in it, and I'm on the same page with George Lucas." That's probably never going to happen again, but it's pretty wild.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that is pretty awesome. That's you're getting equal billing there.
Yeah. Yeah, something like that. It's pretty fun. Before we move on to after the break, I wanted to talk to you both. And Dennis, I'm not sure what kind of a collector you are. I know that Chris is a prolific collector. And I was wondering what kind of availability the two of you are seeing with Star Wars 40th anniversary action figures. Are you finding them anywhere?
I've seen one or two in a few places, maybe at a Target, but I have not seen much at all branded as 40th anniversary action figures. There's been plenty of action figures out there, more than I'm used to seeing, but just nothing with that 40th anniversary logo on it.
I have seen a few. Unfortunately, they seem to be dominantly Princess Leia and Obi-Wan Kenobi and Luke. Out of everything that I've seen, it's widely known that Han and R2-D2 are a bit more rare.
Yes,
and that could be for a couple of reasons. One, because they're how many might come in a case. Another reason might be because we have not seen them in recent Black Series 6-inch figure releases, as opposed to having just recently got Princess Leia in a wave, as well as Luke, Farm Boy, and Ben Kenobi. I didn't actually have a Black Series R2-D2, so I was glad that I caught wind a couple of weeks ago that some of them were starting to show up in certain stores, and so when I went to the store, I ended up finding an R2-D2. Apart from that, it's been very, very, very slim pickings. That's unfortunate, and unfortunately also echoed in a lot of the groups that I belong to. It's been pretty challenging to get a hold of items.
So I did a little digging, and as you mentioned, R2 is just one per pack. So if you do, kudos to you for finding that, Chris. That's a good find. How does he look in person?
Oh no, it's awesome. In fact, I was lucky. I found two.
Nice.
So which is, it's always my goal. Like I'd like to find two. One to keep in the packaging, and the 40th anniversary packaging certainly, and another one to open. And I did not have an R2D2 besides this one, so it was nice to have a second one. It looks fantastic. It's pretty much the same thing to my knowledge, and I will stand corrected, but it's pretty much just like the first release, the Black Series R2D2. The one that, believe it or not, I've found probably more frequently, that I was kind of surprised to find more frequently at GameStop, the exclusive R5D4. I've seen a lot of people. I've probably seen more people say they found the R5D4 GameStop exclusive than I have seen find the R2D2, which, that's anecdotal evidence. I'm not looking at this scientifically. It's just seeing what happens in my feed. Then there's also the Luke Skywalker from Celebration. It's kind of got a foil design card, like this luster to the lettering. That was released by Hasbro on their store very briefly, and I was lucky enough to get into the window to have picked up one of those as well. That's also a re-release, though.
So they are 6-inch scale.
Yes, yeah, they're definitely inch scale. If you were looking for something more like the classic 3 and 3/4 inch scale, they're die-cast figurines, which I guess I understand the interest in them by some, but I was only interested in getting the Darth Vader one. I opened it. It had limited articulation, wonderful sculpt, but it's just a looker more than anything. I've seen a lot of those in places, probably just as probably a bit more prevalent than the 40th anniversary figures on the large cards. And then, of course, when I do, it's typically ones that I'll see everywhere: the Obi-Wan Kenobi, the Luke Skywalker Farm Boy, and Princess Leia.
Chris, did you get the Vader?
Oh yeah, that's the. In fact,
I've favorite, right?
Yeah. He tends to be a focus. Although anymore, I'm unfocused. I'm focused on Star Wars. The starter pack, I think, the starter kit that they released. Surprisingly, I've seen those on shelves too. Not as frequently, let's say, as I might, the Princess Leia, etc. But still have seen them be on store shelves, and others have as well. And it could very well be the price point of $40, which is neat because you get the stand upon which you can place the quote-unquote first 12 figures, although they're not in the classic 3 and 3/4 inch scale, they're in the 6-inch scale. I heard that the Darth Vader was going to be released as a separate carded figure, so you didn't have to buy the starter kit, the starter pack with the stand to get the Darth Vader. There's actually a variant Darth Vader. One has slightly more red glowing eyes. They don't glow, but they're red eyes versus black eyes. Red tint. Thank you. Yeah. I didn't want to mislead. Wait, they glow? No, there's not. So I was lucky to find one, or actually a couple, early on, and that unfortunately seems to be the situation anymore. That if you don't catch something early on with a wave release, especially with later waves, it's difficult to find, and it could be because of imbalanced distribution or just an increased awareness by scalpers, who will very often, poach the products and then, turn around and jack up the rates to, ungodly sums. We are now we should be well into wave 3 release of the 3 and 3/4 inch line from the Rogue One figure series. I've yet to see maybe more than one or two on pegs. And unfortunately, that seems to be the case with other people as well. So that prompted me to just go and buy a case outright and just be done with it. 2 of each, and I was fine. And I had to do the same thing with Wave 4, which I don't believe is set to be released until June.
What is and you just found Fenn Rau, is that right?
So I bought a case. So I have Fen Rao, Admiral Raddus, Selfla, the Scarif Stormtrooper, the Death Trooper. That these two were like reissues from, or I guess holdovers from Wave 3. Not bad to have duplicates of. And then there's one more that I can't remember right now. It's not. Oh, there's one more that was released in this. Galen Urso with the mouse droid.
Oh, nice.
So, yeah, those are not set to be released until June. But I'm just so sick of kind of going around and not finding what it is that I'm looking for. I'm like, forget it. I'm just getting the case. And they've kind of taken the fun out of toy runs anymore. It's just it's become a lot more difficult, and I'm not the only person to say such a thing.
No, well, the local Walmart where I am at, where Corey and I live, is they have not restocked for probably 3 or 4 months. So the only figures they have on pegs is the Star Wars Rebels Princess Leia. That's it. They never have anything. And I have not seen a single 40th anniversary figure around here. Now, I saw a lot of them at Celebration, but because there was so much going on, I just sort of convinced myself not to spend too much time on it because I wanted to try to save money for other things. And then I had the unfortunate or fortunate luck, I guess if you're Hasbro, of seeing a high-res close-up of Obi-Wan Kenobi. And through the show and then through Twin Sons and Stephen Stanton's portrayal of Sir Alec Guinness's Ben Kenobi, I've really grown so much more fond of the older Ben. So I saw that close-up image of his face, and I thought, I've got to get this thing. And now after hearing you talk, Chris, I'm afraid you're going to pull me in to get the rest of them.
It's not my scale. I always say that.
Yeah,
yet
same with me.
I kind of got pulled in when the Force Awakens spun up and they started the red box types of designs. But there's they have a certain charm. Not my scale, but they're fun. It's just frustrating and yet fun. That is the world of collecting anymore.
I agree. Dennis,
I
that tempt you?
Well, I was tempted to try and pick up the Luke in his flight suit when we were at Celebration. Yeah. And I was literally 7th or 8th in line when they ran out for the weekend. So I missed out on that. I don't typically do the 6-inch figures, and I'm not that big of an action figure collector in general. I think I have a dozen or so on my shelves at the moment, maybe a few more in my closet.
The way I envy you, because you have more room in your house.
Well, I fill that up with plenty of other things. The Lego kits that I have for Star Wars take up a lot of room. Nice. But those, if I were going to get into the Black Series with the 6-inch, these anniversary figures are the ones that would do it. That Darth Vader is simply amazing looking.
And the stand it comes with, I really find fascinating as well, because it's the one from the early bird, of course.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The minus the contraption that would allow you to spin the figures. But yeah, the Vader is pretty close to the one that they had already issued a while ago. I mean, there were some differences in styling, much to the I guess a lot of people caught the differences. I don't know if my eye is as fine even with Vader as some people, but that Vader is an update to an older 6-inch Vader, and then there was also an exclusive Vader 6-inch Emperor's Wrath that had the purple bluish semi-translucent helmet that was released as an exclusive a few years ago.
Well, I had probably between 15 and 20 of the 6-inch Black Series figures. I just sort of grabbed them ever since they came out a few years ago. And then when I redid our basement and I built this Star Wars office, I was running out of room and I was looking at them. And I was looking at my Kenner figures from way back when we were younger. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to go with Kenner. So I sold them all and I bought a bunch of stands. And I haven't looked back once. And then, of course, as I said, I had the unfortunate luck of seeing that incredible Ben Kenobi. So, hey, good problem to have, right? So we're going to go ahead and we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk with Jason Braham about what's going on in Star Wars canon. This is Coffee with Kenobi.
This is Coffee with Kenobi. Oh, pass the cream, would you?
Coffee with Kenobi is sponsored by the Star Wars digital card trader collecting app from Topps. If you love Star Wars and love the excitement of chasing your favorite Star Wars collectibles, the Star Wars digital card trader collecting app from Topps is for you. Download the free app from iTunes or Google Play and collect your favorite images from the classic 1977 Star Wars cards to the Clone Wars, Star Wars Rebels, The Force Awakens, Rogue One, and so much more. Collect and trade with friends new and old through the Star Wars digital card trader collecting app from Topps. These are the cards you're looking for. A big reason for the success of our show is our CWK Patreon contributors, including Jason Hall, Dennis Keithley, Angela Souse, Aaron Harris, David Strutt, Mediocre Jedi, BJ Smith, Nick Deco, Adam Leonard, Mark Suter, Mike Audette, Eric Struthers, Jared Cantor, and Swara Sala. It's a monthly donation that goes towards show expenses, equipment, and travel. It really makes a difference for Coffee with Kenobi. Plus, there are a number of incentives that help you get more involved with the show. For example, a donation of $10 or more provides you the link to an exclusive Google Hangout where we will have our own Star Wars discussion. Patreon contributors who donate $35 or more will get the newest show before anyone else. Increments of $50 or more and for a specific amount of time will get you access to all the previous rewards that I just mentioned, and depending on your donation, we'll guarantee that you co-host with me and another guest host for anywhere from one show all the way to an entire month. There are also t-shirts and coffee mugs involved. Check out the link on our webpage or the show notes for more information. We check in now with Jason Blaine. Jason, as well as Nick Deco, send their segments once a month at the old iteration of the show. And now that we're weekly, I'm happy to say that it's going to continue with the new format, but they're going to be on live with. And I've always wondered, what inspired you to explore Star Wars canon the way that you have?
Oh man, that's such an interesting question. Gosh, when I was much younger, I was really into the books of the old days, the X-Wing series, pretty much anything post Return of the Jedi. I tried to gobble up as much as I could. As I got into like my studies in college and real life, that died off, and of course those expanded universe books were just voluminous. It was just difficult to keep up. So it kind of died off. I think my fandom in terms of the expanded storytelling universe really exploded when Disney acquired Lucasfilm, and they decided to, in a sense, wipe the slate clean and make sure they have that story group and that storytelling effort. Once I got into those first couple of books and just seeing how they were able to connect all the pieces together, that's really what got me hooked. And I've always been a sucker for epics. I've been a sucker for stories, and whether it's movies or video games or stories that have either a common legend they're drawing upon or a common narrative universe. I've been a sucker for them, and Star Wars is just the coolest one of them out there. So it's been really fun to explore them in that way.
Well, you're not going to get an argument from us on that, that's for sure. And here's a real confession, Showman. I've never read any of the X-Wing books. Does that make me a terrible Legends fan?
Not a bit. I've sworn off Legends, so it's okay.
That if you're going to go back to Legends, that is definitely an area that should be revisited. Those were some of my favorites.
Yeah, those got me hooked for sure.
Chris, you much of a Legends fan? Did you read some of the expanded universe back when it was in its heyday?
One or two. Actually listened to learned about Thrawn in audiobook way back in the day. But didn't really get into EU. I guess it was just that time in my life.
Yeah, I've never been really much of an EU guy either. Definitely not like Randy moved from Legends Library, but I certainly appreciate it, and I love how they're able to pick and pull from things as they see fit to add to our canonical Star Wars now. And Jason, obviously a lot has been released over the past month and a half. Let's go back to Thrawn and just kind of go from there about what is out there for people if they want to read more about what's going on besides the films.
Absolutely. Well, Thrawn was definitely the big kind of anchor point novel for the current time period. I mean, Thrawn was a great point in our storytelling where we were able to explore Thrawn as we know him from Rebels. What an awesome way to explore that character with the original author behind it. And I don't know what everybody else thought about the book. I'm just a few pages from the end. I definitely have my own opinions. I think it's I guess the biggest takeaway for me with Thrawn was how connected they made that book with the storyline in Star Wars Rebels. I mean, not only Thrawn, but kind of the other main character in that book was Governor Price, which is kind of a really neat connection. And if you're really familiar with the Rebels series, that adds a whole nother layer of understanding and appreciation for the book.
I've gotten so sidetracked with, but I've gotten so focused on kind of rebooting the show here that I haven't been able to read Thrawn. I read Guardians of the Whills. That was the last one I read, but it seems like there's kind of a mixed reaction to Thrawn online.
Yeah, I don't know what I'll let everybody else talk in a second, but I think there is there's something about the way they're telling Star Wars stories now that I think Thrawn came as a shock because it's not, they can't do the big stories that they did with the Thrawn trilogy. You can't create a movie and a book, because if you do, then you're potentially taking away from the storytelling of a future director for a film. So I think that's something, as we bring these characters back into canon, we have to adjust our thinking as to how they're approaching storytelling.
Jason, do you prefer this version of Thrawn or the Thrawn that we met in Heir to the Empire?
Oh, man. I read Heir to the Empire so long ago, which is fortunate for me because I don't think I think if I had that fresh in my mind going into this book, I may have been more disappointed than others. I think this is the Thrawn we see in Rebels clearly. And we do have some layers of that Thrawn we saw. But, I mean, there's so much of the other part of the galaxy that they had to layer into this novel that I think I don't know if it's as much of Thrawn as it is the restrictions of the universe that he's currently telling a story in.
My opinion had been that the Thrawn that was in Heir to the Empire would have been way out of Hera and Kanan and the rest of the crew of the Ghost League. But as brilliant as he is here, he's a bit more in line with what they're capable of handling, especially since he's got the full weight of the Empire as opposed to the remnants of the Empire. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's a really interesting question.
That seems to be kind of what they're going for too, obviously, because they had to repurpose him, and obviously they still keep the heart and soul of the character fairly intact. I mean, you bring back the creator, Timothy Zahn. I mean, you keep bringing up Heir to the Empire, as you should, when we're talking about Grand Admiral Thrawn. That was my freshman year of college when that book came out. And I remember trying to stay away. I mean, not staying away, but there really wasn't much to dive into. And I saw that there was a sequel to Return of the Jedi, and I knew it wasn't necessarily canonical, but I was so fascinated by the fact that there was more story because I couldn't wrap my head around that. And it was brilliant. It was just amazing. There was really something to be said about running to a bookstore instead of a movie theater to get more Star Wars. And I purposefully have avoided Heir to the Empire for a long time because when I jump into Thrawn, like you mentioned before, I don't want to have those shadows in my head because that will definitely skew my opinion of the new book.
Yeah, well, personally, I like this version of Thrawn better. I think he fits in well with the Empire. I enjoy him being here in this time period, and I've enjoyed the inclusion of other characters from Rebels that we got to know with Governor Price, especially in the story as well. And I thought Zahn did a fantastic job.
Jason, what else do we have out there now? I mentioned Guardians of the Whills. Have any of you read that?
I have.
It's on my nightstand.
It's brilliant.
It
really is.
I've dived into a little bit, not enough to give a full opinion, but I mean that is. It's interesting. We're so far away from Rogue One in terms of we're all looking forward to The Last Jedi from a film standpoint. That here drops not only this book but Rebel Rising, 2 books that tell backstories of characters that we were wanting to know so much about, since we know that there's really not much of a story beyond what we saw them in. We were itching to know how they got where they started, and this is both of those books are a great way to do it.
There's certainly I'm kind of in an interesting place, and I'm sure you all will agree with me. There's so much Star Wars out there now, and we're ravenous for it. But sometimes it feels like you have Star Wars homework. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but there's definitely a lot of material which we never thought would happen when we were in the mid-'90s, or early 90s, I should say.
Yeah, I agree. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I'm fortunate that I have a 45-minute train ride, and so I get to invest time into reading that. But yes, I've had to make decisions on how I'm going to consume these and what's the most efficient way at times. I've like I said, I've been fortunate enough to have time to get through Thrawn and Guardians of the Whills, and I'm now trying to finish up Rebel Rising. And it was making some tough judgment calls there on what do I think I'm going to be the most interested in and excited by, and I'll do that first. And then, well, how am I going to do the rest? Am I going to do an audiobook so I can listen to that while I'm walking the dog, or how am I going to take that in? Because there's, you had the comics and everything else that's out there right now, and there's more than enough to choose from. You can't run dry on Star Wars content right now.
And that's what I was basically echoing. Like, I'm happy to have it. I remember the dead period where I guess as I was kind of growing up, I was just in high school when Heir to the Empire was released, and it was just kind of strange. It's like, what's this? Like, it's not a movie. Oh, I guess it's a book. Oh, okay. And I wasn't steeped in comics. Then of course, I got busy with school and college and whatnot, so I kind of fell away. But honestly, it was a happy time in my life when I saw the Star Wars Bendems on toy shelves.
Oh, yeah.
Just overjoyed with seeing Star Wars figures out there again, despite their quality. Like, okay. It was just, I remember the time where we just didn't have a lot. So I'm very happy to have more than enough in a stack of comics that I have to get through. I'm happy to have that as my homework, so to speak.
Well, very good. Jason, fantastic premiere here, sir. Where can people check you out? That would be Twitter, right? At Star Wars TCE. Is that your Twitter handle?
That's correct. Yeah, and I do monthly YouTube videos on the timeline. Of course, some of the little treasures that also release throughout the month. Try to catch those and put those in my videos. So StarWarsTCE.com is a great way to find those.
And the first time we met, you had emailed me, and I'd say maybe 2 Thanksgivings ago, and I checked out your YouTube channel, and the amount of detail you put into connecting these dots, you do a lot of the heavy lifting for people, and I appreciate that. So thanks for being on, Jason.
My pleasure.
So we will see Jason back again with us next month. When we return, we're going to do some news. This is Coffee with Kenobi.
Better than one of those coffee chains. It's Coffee with Kenobi.
Today is a great day to download the Star Wars Digital Card Trader Collecting app from Topps. Recent additions to the app include the Retro Print Series number 3. You've got Vintage Visions, which are incredibly classic, iconic moments from the 40 years of Star Wars. It really focuses on A New Hope, and there's some beautiful ones available right now. Another thing I also love about this Star Wars Digital Card Trader Collecting app is that it features so many images that I know and love from my childhood, from current fandom. There's so many aspects of the saga here too, including the original trilogy, the prequels, the Clone Wars, Rebels, The Force Awakens, and of course, Rogue One. It's also very easy to get into, and it's a lot of fun. Your favorite Star Wars characters, scenes, and moments are in every single pack. After you download it, you're going to open the app every single day, and you'll get a free credit for every day that you open up the cards. And there are rewards if you open them for a week straight. Plus, if you can't get what you're looking for, if you have your eyes on a very specific card, there's a place you can trade with your friends as you complete your Star Wars collection. And the best news of all, the cards are free. And for experienced collectors, there are exclusive cards, special inserts, and even autograph opportunities. And don't worry about missing the ones you really want, because you can sign up for notifications right on the app. The Star Wars Digital Card Trader Collecting app from Topps can be downloaded for free from iTunes or Google Play. Be sure to download the app and start your collection today. The Star Wars digital card credit collecting app from Topps is available now. And remember, these are the cards you're looking for. We're in the news segment of the show. I mentioned at the top of the show, Tom is our normal CWK newsman, but he had a prior commitment tonight, so we just are going to do it solo. He's done a great job too, so Tom, you've left some big shoes to fill. But I want to start looking at Clone Wars news. I first heard about this on Twitter, and I had to check it for myself, so I pull up Netflix. Of course, Clone Wars has been on Netflix for a substantial amount of time. And sure enough, at the very top of the screen when you're watching any episode of Clone Wars, it says, Clone Wars available until June 7th. Thoughts on this?
I'm not concerned. We just go through this a couple months ago. There was, without announcement, they started putting up a tag there that it was available till it was March or May. I can't remember, or March. And then that day came and went. It was still there. So absent an official announcement, I'm just rolling with it like it's still going to be there.
I'm not too worried.
Well, I mean, honestly, whether it's there or not, I like having the convenience of it, but I've got the Blu-ray, so it's not like I can't have access to it, but there's just something about that convenience. As far as for my family, I would say the majority of the binge watching or things of that nature that my family does, especially the kids, is on their iPads or on their phones, and they've got Netflix, and that seems to be a much more accessible way for people to consume this kind of media. And I think maybe that's where some of the angst from some fans are coming from.
Yeah, no, our house is kind of the same thing.
Yeah, I have all the seasons on Blu-ray as well. But you're right. When I go to watch Clone Wars, I fire up Netflix to do it. And I don't know if that's simply because it'll just tell me where I left off, or I just don't have to take 6 steps to the cabinet and pull the Blu-ray out and put it in the player, or what. But
for the DVD player to load.
Yeah, but it is it's incredibly convenient, and yeah, I can't take the Blu-rays necessarily with me on my phone. So if I'm nonchalant about it, simply because I don't actually believe it's going away, I think it'll still be there until we hear some announcement that says otherwise. But it is incredible format for that show. It makes it incredibly convenient. We regularly watch Netflix in spurts, 5 or 6 episodes maybe on a weekend. That's how my kids got into Star Wars, and so Clone Wars will always have a special place in my heart.
It brought a lot of people into the fandom, for sure. I think there's something to be said, too. Do you think, Chris, that we'll ever see a 4K release of Clone Wars or Rebels?
I kind of doubt it. I mean, it's always a possibility, but I'm not sure if that would be warranted. I mean, after having watched Rebels now for 3 seasons, we recently went and watched a couple of the early episodes of the Clone Wars. And, in my mind's eye, I'm thinking, there's not that much of a difference between the animation, the quality of animation, but it kind of shows, like, just in terms of, articulation and movement in Clone Wars episodes compared to a slightly more fluid style in Rebels. I mean, that, whether that was intentional, I guess not really for me to discern, but or even well within my realm of understanding, the upscaling it to 4K, I'm not sure would serve it any better than how it is today. Some would argue that the original films, canon should be released in 4K. Again, I'm probably the worst person to ask about that, because I don't mind watching YouTube videos. In terms of quality, I see the difference, but it's not something that that necessarily drives my own behaviors.
Sure, I think it's more for like, I think I'd like to have another, because I'm looking right now in the studio, and I see my Star Wars Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi beta copy. So I just kind of like having all the different formats.
Beta. That's going way back. That's impressive.
That beta, that Star Wars beta, I've talked about this before, but the New Hope beta, when we bought it, it cost $100.
Bam.
Because they weren't priced to rent. There was no, they were priced just because they wanted you to rent the movies. They didn't think people would want to buy them, which seems kind of hard to believe nowadays.
Yeah. Chris brought up an interesting point about the animation between Clone Wars and Rebels.
Yeah.
And he's right. I feel like with Clone Wars, in many cases, the characters are more detailed, but the animation, when they go to make them move, isn't as great as it is in Rebels these days. I was noticing that watching, I think it was a couple season 2 episodes this past weekend, just watching them run, and it almost kind of looked like they were running in place and then being dragged across the screen at times, as opposed to, take Kanan and Ezra in an action scene, and when they move, it's very convincing.
Which, I think was the best they could do at the time. That's definitely not to take away from the Clone Wars, because to me it doesn't take away from the Clone Wars. But I don't look at even watching Rebels. I watch it and I enjoy it more for story. Yeah, animation's nice, but I don't look at it as needing to be absolutely realistic. By any stretch. Although I would still hope eventually for some kind of live action television series in the Star Wars galaxy.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's just
that's a rumor.
That's
every week. That's a rumor.
Yes, that is. We
sorry.
No worries. We definitely have the mythology is much more beautiful, I think, because of Clone Wars and Rebels. So next thing I want to look at, recently StarWars.com revealed that Funko is going to go mini on us, and they're going to have blind box sets. They're going to be called the Star Wars Mystery Minis. This is very similar to the Star Wars, the Disney Vinylmations that they have, which I absolutely love. And basically you buy the box, they're blind boxes, you can't see what's in them, and you just sort of have to hope that you get what you're looking for, or you trade, or really what I think they want you to do is buy an entire box of them so you're guaranteed them. And they have chasers. For this first one, they're going to come out this summer, and there's a set of 15, and they are, of course, all focusing on the 40th anniversary. And I'm going to send a copy of this to the chat also, if you guys haven't seen what it looks like. But, oh man, I have the same wonderful problem when I see this new stuff. I'm like, oh, that is so awesome. Darn it. Where am I going to put this now? What do you guys see? Have you seen which ones stamp out to you?
Yeah. They're a little smaller. They're Funko. They are little bobbleheads, which to me is a little disappointing.
I agree.
That has more to do with it's a licensing thing, and I've known that it's a licensing thing and Hasbro and all that for quite some time, but it still annoys me. I would be so much happier if those little figurines were semi-articulated, even if it was a classic, 5 POA, which I'm fine with.
Or even if they were like the Disney video games, Disney Infinity.
Oh, right. No, those are, those figurines are, they're interesting. We certainly have them, especially because you can get them like $3 a pop now.
Yeah.
But Funko does a pretty good job. They also have the plans, and these are apparently now purchasable by boxes of Mimoji, Star Wars Mimoji. So like little emoji heads of Star Wars characters also being produced. So a lot of those blind boxes, are starting to make their way into the Star Wars fandom.
What price point are we seeing with these?
God, I don't know offhand personally, and they're not available quite yet officially. You can buy boxes ahead of time, pre-order, as most people might. I'd imagine they're going to be between 3 and 5 per, which is kind of insane. But
yeah,
all the more reason why when it comes to getting like any kind of like Lego, I'm a huge minifig guy. Getting the Lego minifigure series, the series that they run, they're up to 17 now, I guess. I have to get them pretty much en masse because trying to find them all and feeling through the bags is just, it's impossible. Without trying to piecemeal it and spending so much time and energy and effort. And I don't know anybody else who would be collecting that might be able to trade.
Right.
Yeah, like I kind of go back with what I was talking about a bit ago in saying sometimes it's just as easy to buy a case. Sometimes it's just as easy to buy the box spot on rather than just doing it one at a time.
I went the
if you want to
case route
that.
when they had the Macquarie Star Wars figures. I don't know how long ago that was, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, something like that. Because I knew that was the only way I was going to get them, and I've never regretted it. They look gorgeous. Speaking of looking gorgeous, which one of these 15, or which northern one per se, do you guys find yourselves thinking, oh, I'd like to get that one?
I'm looking at Han Solo here.
Disney?
Yeah, I always have a spot of fondness for C-3PO simply because that was the first action figure I ever had, and so I like that one as well. These things are dangerous.
I know, it's not fair.
Yeah, I mean, I have a fairly decent Star Wars Funko collection because I do the Smuggler's Bounty box, and that's how I've acquired almost all of my Star Wars Funko with the exception of 2 or 3. I wanted Hera and Ahsoka, so I got them. Outside of that, what would prevent me from doing this is, I think, the ability to choose the blind aspect of it. I wasn't just going and buying an entire case full of these things, so I was getting them all at once. The not knowing what I was going to get is kind of a turnoff for me, simply because I'm trying not to be a completist in any collection. I'm trying just to get pieces that I like. If I did these, I think I would just get 2 or 3 and then be happy with the ones I got and maybe trade them. But I don't know that I could go all in trying to get the Han and 3PO, and gosh, there's so many good ones here.
Well, it's almost like you have to get together with a number of your friends.
See,
and say, hey, let's piecemeal this thing.
Exactly. Or, you just trade them, like basically how things were way back in the day, and which, it's nice to have the option. I just don't know if I know too many other people who are into that, specifically, being able to swap and trade with a great degree of ease compared to growing up, right? And everybody had Garbage Pail Kids or Star Wars figures, and, you'd be able to trade with a greater degree of ease.
What I also like about,
if you're guaranteed one, which one would you want, Chris?
Vader. It's Vader. That's not that probably isn't even a question. I figured you were going to say that. Well, but if I had, like, my first figure was the AT-AT driver, and I grew up. I'm AT-AT like through and through. It's not an AT-AT because Kenner called it an AT-AT, and even the Star Wars ABC on record called it an AT-AT. So I blame the toys for making me believe that it's an AT-AT. So I always hope for that to show up in these collections.
Oh, for sure. Well, surprisingly they have I thought it was a Death Trooper, but they have a Shadow Trooper, which I don't know if I would have picked that for 12th and the 40th anniversary, but hey, right on. Last thing I want to look at too, Ian Desher, definite friend of the show, great guy. I was fortunate to help him work on the prequels for the Star Wars Shakespeare books. So he's got a new one coming out October 3rd, The Force Doth Awaken. Have you guys seen the cover to this thing?
I have not.
Have you seen it, Chris?
Yeah, I have. It's BB-8, correct?
Yeah, isn't it amazing?
Yeah. I was never a huge Shakespeare fan, even though I am an English major with a writing background, English education actually, teaching background.
Oh, see, I knew there was a reason I liked you.
Although it's interesting, Eric Geller. Sorry, not to sidetrack, but this is kind of relevant.
Sure.
With going off, we'll go back to the Shakespeare thing in a second. Besides my not incredible fondness for Shakespeare, but he was pointing out the amount of grammatical errors that happen in the crawls in the comics, the Marvel comics that are canon. He just tore one to shreds. I think it was yesterday in a tweet. It was just funny.
Oh my gosh! I don't know how I've missed that. Obviously as a high school English teacher, I even judge people on how they text me with their. So how am I missing
No,
that?
he did. Eric. I mean, he writes for Politico now, but he's a huge Star Wars fan. He was pointing out, I think it was the crawl in Kanan, the canon arc. He's like, oh my God, do copy editors read this? And he's pointing out like there's a what was it, a tense shift, and like just it was what he was basically calling out, marking up. I thought it was like, whoa, how did I miss that? I guess I was just kind of like, yeah, okay, get on to the meat of it. But man, he was right. He was right.
That's surprising because Eric is usually so understated. So I can tell you this though, Chris, if you like Shakespeare and use it to teach Star Wars, you get to be in a Target commercial. So I highly recommend it.
Yeah. I know there is that. I just couldn't. I got it, but at the same time, I'm like, this isn't my language. It's my language, but it ain't my time period. Like that's like closer to Middle English.
I love that you said this ain't my time period when you talk about Shakespeare. I love that.
Of course. Hey, I was actually in a heated discussion with my wife, who speaks both Spanish and English very fluently on either side. And she said, I didn't think you could use ain't. I'm like, if you understood what it was I'm saying, then you got it. Then the language worked. It's just but I always like that about language. I always love that about language, is that it's, you're able to communicate an idea, and sometimes it's relevant, for the time period. Like 100 years from now, if you say, catch me outside, how about that? It's not going to make any sense. But if you say it right now, like, people might get it because there's a cultural, significance to this shared experience, or just that knowledge of what that is and what it means. And it means nothing.
I love that.
But it means
definitely.
Sorry.
No, right on, brother. I mean, I can talk about language all day. I pretty much do, to be honest. I'm just excited because Ian is such a great guy. I've had the good fortune to hang out with him a number of times in person, and I just know what he puts into these things. And the art is beautiful. The art is done by a gentleman, I believe, from France. And he's not necessarily even a Star Wars fan, but when he puts that pen on paper, he comes up with some beautiful art.
Yeah, you sent us the link here to this book, and BB-8 in the in that garb is fantastic. I haven't had the opportunity to read any of these books cover to cover yet, but I have flipped through them when I've been at the bookstore. I too have a degree in English.
Wow!
And
what a trio we are.
Yeah.
Funny.
And read plenty of Shakespeare when I was in college. And I remember the scene. How did he title the Phantom Menace one?
The Phantom Menace.
Yeah, that was my memory too. Or I think it was Qui-Gon doing a line out of Taken about having a particular set of skills. Right. He managed to blend Star Wars, Taken, and Shakespeare all in one book, and that was simply fantastic.
So I Rick roll too in one of them.
Really?
Yeah.
That's great.
And I believe he even has some Snoop Mind of My Money, Money of My Mind. I think he has Watto saying that.
Well, that takes a lot of talent to be able to combine all those things. Yeah, I do enjoy Star Wars mashups, whether it's with Shakespeare or doing some sort of steampunk combination. And when I've had the opportunity to look at these, they've always been fun reads.
Yeah, I don't like Shakespeare. I mean, I have nothing against him. I'm sorry.
No, not
I should not. I don't want to end on a down note. But I do have the books, and if I were to read any Shakespearean-esque types of text, that they would be it, because at least I understand the story. I always appreciated, honestly, I'm not going to lie, I don't mind seeing Shakespeare plays or in theater. But reading reading Shakespeare is tedious by comparison, because they're plays, they're meant to be seen, right?
Right, that's true.
And so despite my love for language and writing, I very much, like, you gave me a choice every single time I'd go to a production.
Well, I don't disagree with you. The thing about Shakespeare, of course, the reason I probably know Romeo and Juliet as well as I know A New Hope, because I've taught it so many times. And I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but it is kind of fun to mess with my students when I can basically recite it as they're going along, because I feel like that makes them pay more attention. And hey, if you need shock value to get your students to pay attention, that works. but it's entertaining. I've seen this performed at Celebration Anaheim, just little snippets, and it's wildly entertaining. It completely backs up what you're saying, Chris, about seeing it performed. And he, like I said, Ian does a lot of acrostics, which is where you take the first letter of each line. It spells out a word or a message or something to that effect. When he was working on the second one, The Clone Army Attacketh, he was asking me to explain the whole Sifo Dyas and why is there even a clone army in the first place. So I tried to explain it to him in a way that I hoped made sense, because it's really confusing, probably one of the more confusing aspects of the entire saga. So I get the copy of the book, and he wrote an acrostic to me when Count Dooku is questioning Obi-Wan Kenobi and trying to get him to join him. And he wrote an acrostic that says, "I trust in Zare." So I found that pretty cool.
That's pretty cool. Yeah.
Pretty fun.
It's
So we're going to go ahead and take a break, and we're going to be back with talk on something I think we all can definitely get on board with, talking about George Lucas and his recent birthday. This is Coffee with Kenobi.
This is Coffee with Kenobi. Oh, pass the cream, would you?
Coffee with Kenobi was sponsored by the Star Wars digital card trader collecting app from Topps. If you love Star Wars and love the excitement of chasing your favorite Star Wars collectibles, the Star Wars digital card trader collecting app from Topps is for you. Download the free app from iTunes or Google Play and collect your favorite images from the classic 1977 Star Wars A New Hope cards to the Clone Wars, Star Wars Rebels, The Force Awakens, Rogue One, and much, much more. Collect and trade with friends new and old through the Star Wars digital card trader collecting app from Topps. These are the cards you're looking for. For the Coffee Chat segment of the show, George Lucas recently had his 73rd birthday. Now I want to take a few moments to reflect on his legacy and current status on fandom. Now this isn't really something where, let's talk about his legacy, because I think that's intact. None of us would know each other, talk about Star Wars Online or anything if not for George Lucas. I just think when I found out he was 73 years old, that really boggles the mind.
Yeah. I know I think I've said it here on your show, Dan, previously in other places, but Star Wars was the first movie I ever saw when I was 3 years old. And so he's always been part of, the entertainment industry for me. I mean, he's been the entertainment industry for me, Star Wars being my biggest fandom out there. And to think of him and the rest of the members of the cast being in these elevated ages now, is just, wow, kind of worrisome on one hand, but I don't think of them that way anymore. So often when I see George, it's on a documentary attached to one of the DVDs or something that I picked up 15, 20 years ago. And, he's a much younger looking man then. And then, when we got to see him at Celebration, he was starting to look his 73 years. But, what an incredible run it's been for him.
I guess I just don't. I don't think about it. And maybe it's because as I'm getting older, and we must be right around the same age, the three of us.
I think we are.
Because, I think I remember seeing Star Wars, like it was first run. My dad apparently took me. We waited in line. I couldn't have been more than, let's see here, like 4, right around there. And I may have only remembered one scene from the movie. And maybe it's just that I don't want to reflect on how old I'm getting. I'm like, everybody I know is getting old.
See, I think that's why it hit me. I don't think about how old he is either, because he's sort of timeless. He's kind of like George Washington or Abraham Lincoln or something. Then I saw that he's 73, and I thought, wow, he's definitely more towards the end of his life than he is the beginning, and he's still trucking along, doing beautifully, thank goodness. But it's just staggering the kind of impact he's had. And, I mean, he's not going to have anything to do with the next Indiana Jones, is at least officially that's what's been said. He was on the sets for Force Awakens and Rogue One, and he was one of the first to see them. Of course, how do you not show it to George Lucas? But he really has managed to keep everything at an arm's length. And I feel like fandom is embracing him more. Now, for the record, I've never not embraced George Lucas. I think he's... If I was able to have dinner with 4 people throughout history, I think I would want to sit down. I like to have Phil Jackson, George Lucas, Mark Twain, and Jesus there. That would be one heck of a conversation because I think he's that iconic.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you don't like to think of your heroes getting older, for one thing, and the other is that you're right. People have begun to embrace him more, especially recently, and part of that has to do because while we may not agree, there was some backlash to the prequels.
No, it's true, and some of it's reasonable.
Right, and I enjoyed those movies. I was thrilled to have more Star Wars, but a lot of people had serious issues with them. And now that we have additional Star Wars coming, it just seems that people have been able to take a step back from that and look at those movies and appreciate them a bit more, even if it's not their Star Wars in quotes. People aren't looking at them as in some cases as a personal affront anymore to what their memory of the original trilogy was. But we don't have an opportunity to get The Force Awakens and Rogue One without what he brought us before, and that includes the prequels. That is an entire generation Star Wars, and just like the original trilogy was our Star Wars. These are all ways of bringing fans into the fandom, and and he's responsible for all of that.
I guess I'm grateful. I was skeptical, like a lot of people were with the Disney acquisition, but the more I stewed on it, and this is before The Force Awakens, the more I recognized where else was it going to go. Where was it going to go?
Right. All we had were parodies at that time.
Yeah, that was where else was it going to go? So I for that I'm grateful, and I almost I imagine a legacy or an expanded universe, if you will, wherein George Lucas sells to Disney not long after the release of Return of the Jedi, and we might have had completely different. We would have had completely different experiences because the movies would have different movies would have been produced in the interim, and I think it would have. I think that might have. I mean, certainly would have changed everything. But I don't know if it would necessarily change everything for better or for worse. I think we're pretty much looking at Star Wars till the end of time, which is fine by me.
Yeah, well said. That I think that this is another thing about Star Wars. There's just so many places that are open, to interpretation and analysis. And what would it have been like if he had kind of let go of the reins a little bit earlier? Because you're right, Chris. There really wasn't much going on. When the Disney acquisition happened, I thought, I worked at Disney. I proposed to my wife at Disney. I'm a huge Disney fan. So I've thought this was nothing but gold because I knew what Disney did with Marvel and what Disney continues to do with Marvel. And I felt like as much money as they spent on Star Wars, they were going to do it right. And I don't think they've had a single misstep. And I think it's a credit to him for having the vision to say, you know what? There may be things that frustrate me about what's been going on, how I've been treated about the prequels, but I love what I created, and I want to see it grow. And I think, is it fair to say, gentlemen, that Star Wars, I'm not going to say it's bigger, because it's not bigger, but is it richer since he's left? And that's no disrespect to George at all. If anything, it's a credit to him.
I think it's a renewed interest. I think it's renewed passion, and it could be because of timing, too. Because my daughter's now two and a half, so she is a different generation, and so the new Star Wars stuff that we're getting now is perfectly timed, for us. And I think it's just a refresh, honestly, and that's not a bad thing. It's like I saw Guardians of the Galaxy today, Volume 2, and was talking with my friend. He said, "Oh, I like this one better than the first one." I said, "I guess I don't know if I can say that." I said, it's just like Star Wars. When someone asks me, what's your favorite Star Wars movie? I'm like, all of it. I'm like, I can't choose favorites. I have different things that I might like in each one of them. and together this amalgamation, of experiences is what comprises my fandom, right? So I don't have, I think it's the refresh that more than anything that I'm happy about. Plus the new figures. I am a figure fan.
Yes, same here.
Well, I agree that it is richer, and I think part of that is because and I may not be right about this, but it always seemed to me that George Lucas kept a very tight grip on Star Wars. You had authors writing their own books in the expanded universe, but he didn't really take that to heart. But when it came to the movies and things like that, he kept pretty tight control over what that story was going to be and what it was going to look like, rejecting lots of concept art that didn't meet his vision, and constantly sculpting that story, to the point where when it came to the prequels, he wrote and directed all those movies, as opposed to directing the first one and then turning it over to other directors for episodes 2 and 3, like he did with the original trilogy. And now, with the content that we have coming out today, we get J.J. Abrams and Gareth Edwards and other creative voices that are coming in and putting their own stamp on Star Wars. So those are different viewpoints, and it seems to be much more of a collaborative process, from Kathleen Kennedy to, like I said, J.J. Abrams and Gareth Edwards and Rian Johnson now going forth with Episode 8. There's just more voices that are saying what's going to happen in Star Wars. Don't forget Dave Filoni. He's there contributing. He was brought up by George Lucas in the way to do Star Wars, and doing Star Wars right is how Dave termed it at Celebration. But there's a lot more voices that are getting to shape the story and shape the narrative now.
It's definitely become much more open to other creative forces and creative juices, and I feel like fandom has exploded as well. And I don't know if that is necessarily because Disney took over, or because the emergence of social media and specifically Twitter and YouTube and things like that, where more people have more voice. I think one of the things that is so appealing about Star Wars, and why Corey and I wanted to start Coffee with Kenobi, is because we thought there are a lot of people that have a lot to say. We want to give people a voice. We want to give ourselves a voice. And I feel like this has sort of opened the door for that to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely so. And, just building on what I was saying there, is that if George hadn't had such control for the first, 35 years or so of Star Wars, then perhaps we wouldn't have noticed how much more we could add to it now. And that's not to minimize or to take away from anything that he did, because he gave us an incredibly rich universe built on science and whimsy and adventure for all those years that have inspired countless filmmakers and authors and fans.
I think he's as important as Shakespeare. I think he's as important as some of the greatest creative minds is Walt Disney. I think that's where he is in the pantheon. And yes, we're biased, but I don't think many people would dispute that.
No, he's incredibly influential. I'm not sure we get Guardians of the Galaxy and movies like The Fifth Element without him.
Undoubtedly.
All right, excellent. Well, we are going to take a break and return with your emails, tweets, and Facebook posts. This is Coffee with Kenobi.
Better than one of those coffee chains. It's Coffee with Kenobi.
Before we get to email, I want to thank our CWK sponsor, the Star Wars Digital Card Trader Collecting app from Topps. Please support them the way they support our podcast, and remember to listen to new and archive shows of Coffee with Kenobi wherever you listen to podcasts, including iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you enjoy listening to your favorite shows. And if you are listening to the show through iTunes, please leave us a review. We are also on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Pinterest, and we'd love for you to check us out there. Be sure to listen to our CWK family of shows, too, including Legends Library, Rebels Reactions, Comics with Kenobi, and Lattes with Leia. From Dan Malik, hey DMZ, from here on out, you guys need to refer to Tom as Han Burgundy. Love the show, take care. Now this is in response to, I mentioned earlier in the news segment, Tom Gross normally joins us to do the news, and I kept referring to him as CWK Newsman, and we threw the call out there to find a difference for the title for him, and so far this has been my favorite one, Han Burgundy. I don't know if we're going to go with that, but it's pretty entertaining.
It works, definitely.
From Steve Robler, love the podcast. I was listening to yesterday's episode and your discussion about the half marathon made me nostalgic. I ran the inaugural one at Disneyland for my 40th birthday gift and was hooked. I've been trying to get back to it ever since. Attached is my medal from it. The next one I do will be the Rebel Challenge so I can get the 3 medals. Keep up the good work. And he adds, parenthetically, that he needs an episode about the Tron book and listened to the audiobook, and it was awesome. We kind of hit around to that earlier with Jason's segment. I'm telling you, the Star Wars Marathon, ever since we did that show last week particularly, I can't stop thinking about how cool it would be to add one of those medals to my Star Wars collection. Talk about earning a collectible.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wish I could run. I'm just not very good at it. I tend to hurt myself when I do. But if anything was going to get me back into running, it would be one of those medals.
Chris, have you seen these things?
Oh yeah, I have. I just can't imagine flying somewhere to run. Like I get it, medals and collecting it. Yeah. I mean, like if I could do it here, I'd probably do it. But like I just can't imagine paying, let's say, for argument's sake, $99 for a plane ticket or whatever to go and run. Like, I can't even get my own self motivated to get off the couch and walk around the block. Like, really? So. No, I'm not being a curmudgeon. I swear.
No, I love it.
I'm just saying that I wish they had them in places apart from Disney locations.
Now, I will say, I've seen some of these medals on eBay, and I find that to be almost sacrilegious. I mean, why would you work that hard? Why would you sell that? And why would anyone buy something that didn't
Because they had to pay back the plane ticket that they paid for to fly there to get the medal. Like, they're not making money, man.
That's a good point. Huge thanks, of course, definitely, to Dennis Keithley and Chris Perillo for joining me today. Let everybody know where they can find the both of you, and please feel free to plug any projects.
Well, I am the co-host of Starship Sabers and Scoundrels, another Star Wars-related podcast that I co-host with Darth Taxis. We just celebrated our first anniversary of podcasting, looking back on our favorite memories from the past 40 years of Star Wars. So worked very well with our conversation about George Lucas this evening. And beyond that, I review all of the Marvel Star Wars comics over at retrozap.com. So I just now submitted my review of Screaming Citadel, which I enjoyed very much. So you can look for that there.
I'm pretty much all over social, but if I'm not talking about Star Wars anymore, it's usually random bits from observations with my family. I usually try to stay away from politics. However, the current political cycle has me kind of a little on edge, shall we say. So I have to make that disclaimer. But most of the things that I do share happen to be Star Wars related. The project that I do have that might be somewhat relevant is an event series that I just spun up a couple of months ago, March, called Galaxar, and the hope was that I'd be able to more easily find Star Wars collectibles, even though it's not a Star Wars event. That's not what it is. I can't call it that. Disney would be all over me if that was the case. But it was effectively 50 vendors in a community center, and it was kind of like a flea market of sorts with vintage and modern collectibles, Star Wars included. Our next one's coming up in October. This is in the Seattle area at this point in time, but it's something that I'm hoping has legs because it was fun to do.
Sounds amazing. Definitely be sure to follow both Dennis and Chris and all the amazing things they're doing. We will have links to all this in the show notes. And we will be back next week with 2 new co-hosts and more Star Wars talk. This is the podcast you're looking for.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.
There's no one here.